Do you honestly believe a pathetic street rat with your kind of filthy pedigree could ever inherit a single dime of this empire? The venomous words sliced through the heavy, sterile silence of the Billionaire's VIP hospital suite like a jagged blade. Victoria, a vision of pristine white haute couture and dripping in inherited diamonds, sneered as she dangled a faded photograph between her manicured fingers. It was the only surviving picture of the little girl's deceased mother. With a sickeningly calm, calculated smile, the wealthy woman ripped the cherished memory to shreds. She let the pieces flutter down onto the imported Persian rug. She deliberately crushed them beneath the razor-sharp heel of her designer stiletto, grinding the paper into the fibers. You are nothing but a genetic mistake. You are a dirty little secret that I am going to sweep right back into the gutter where you belong. The 8-year-old black girl stood frozen in the suffocating shadows of the massive room. Her tiny hands gripped the edge of her oversized, worn-out sweater. Her dark eyes burned with an unutterable, silent anguish. Yet a fierce, unbroken defiance anchored her small frame to the floor. She was entirely alone in a medical suite that cost more per night than her mother had earned in a lifetime. That heart-wrenching scene is the absolute epitome of high society cruelty. It is the arrogance of the elite attempting to extinguish the light of a helpless, innocent child. But to truly comprehend how this brave girl ended up trapped in the most heavily guarded medical facility in New York, we have to stop the clock. We must rewind this tragedy back to the freezing asphalt of the city's unforgiving slums. Long before the hospital monitors began their steady, depressing hum, there was a quiet, doomed romance. A young heir to a ruthless financial dynasty had committed the ultimate sin against his pure-blooded lineage. He had fallen profoundly, irreversibly in love with a brilliant but deeply impoverished young black woman. She possessed a soul of pure gold and the quiet resilience that terrified his aristocratic, prejudiced family. Their love was a fleeting, beautiful rebellion against the rigid, unspoken caste system of the elite circles. But the establishment always strikes back with devastating, overwhelming force. The billionaire patriarchs orchestrated a brutal, swift separation. They forced the young heir onto a private jet bound for a forced European exile. They threatened to utterly destroy the young woman's life if she ever dared to speak his name again. He left the country with a shattered heart, completely unaware that she was carrying his unborn child. Abandoned and ostracized by a world that worshipped nothing but money, the young mother made a silent vow. She promised to protect her baby at all costs, no matter the personal sacrifice. She worked herself to the bone every single day. She scrubbed grease-stained floors in dimly lit, overnight diners until her knuckles bled raw. She spent her weekends ironing delicate silk clothes for the wealthy families who would never even look her in the eye. Every single penny she earned was meticulously saved to buy baby formula and warm blankets for her beautiful daughter.
I will protect you
The
no
only
matter
piece
what,
of luxury
my
they
love.
ever owned was a cheap, tarnished metal necklace. It was a secret token of love from the exiled heir, bearing 2 intertwined initials
We've
engraved
come
on the
for
back.
her.
The mother carefully fastened it around her growing daughter's neck. It served as a fragile charm of hope in a hopelessly dark and oppressive world. But systemic poverty is a relentless, silent killer that shows no mercy. The grueling physical labor, the chronic lack of proper nutrition, and the biting cold of unheated apartment buildings slowly drained the life from the young mother.
Gotta keep going.
She coughed quietly into the
Just
night,
a little longer.
refusing to spend their meager savings on a doctor's visit. One tragic, freezing winter morning, she simply did not wake up. The little girl was left entirely orphaned. She was swallowed whole by the terrifying apathy of a bustling, millionaire-filled metropolis. She became a ghost on the streets. She survived by selling newspapers on the most freezing, unforgiving corners of the financial district. While other children her age were unwrapping expensive holiday presents by roaring fireplaces, she wrapped her shivering body in discarded cardboard boxes. Her tiny, frostbitten hands would reach out to passing limousines. She begged the men in expensive suits to buy the evening edition just so she could afford a bowl of watery soup. Nobody saw her silent tears falling on the snowy pavement. Nobody cared about the brilliant, sharp mind hiding behind those desperate, hungry eyes. Meanwhile, on the other side of the planet, the exiled heir had metamorphosed into a cold, calculating billionaire. Upon his eventual return to America, he had spent an absolute fortune trying to track down the only woman he ever truly loved. He hired the best private investigators and turned every slum in the city upside down. The only answer he ever received was a cold, bureaucratic death certificate handed to him in a manila envelope. The news permanently killed whatever warmth was left in his soul. He surrendered his personal life to the expectations of his corporate empire. He accepted an arranged, highly publicized political marriage to Victoria. She was the quintessential elite heiress. She was a woman whose blood ran as cold as the ice cubes in her crystal champagne glass. It was a strategic union of immense wealth and absolute, undeniable emotional bankruptcy. Victoria paraded her flawless, pale perfection for the paparazzi cameras. Behind closed doors, she masked a deeply rooted racism and an insatiable toxic greed. Then, fate intervened in the most unexpected, cinematic way possible. The billionaire, suffocating under the crushing weight of his hollow existence, was jogging through Central Park on a dreary afternoon. He collapsed onto a freezing wooden bench, staring blankly at the gray, overcast sky. A small, trembling voice broke through his overwhelming depression. "Excuse me, sir. Would you like to buy a newspaper?" He waved his hand dismissively, not even bothering to look down at the street urchin. But something caught the faint, pale afternoon light. He slowly lowered his gaze and saw the tarnished metal necklace resting against the child's ragged, dirty collar. The sight of the intertwined initials hit him like a physical blow to the chest.
Help me.
He looked directly into the dirt-smudged face of the little newspaper girl. He saw the exact same defiant, beautiful dark eyes that had haunted his agonizing dreams for nearly a decade. The powerful titan of Wall Street fell to his knees right there on the concrete path. Tears streamed down his face as his trembling fingers traced the rusted edges of the necklace. A rapid, highly confidential DNA test confirmed the impossible miracle within hours. He had finally found his missing daughter. He immediately pulled her from the freezing, dangerous streets. He wrapped her in a world of unimaginable luxury, security, and unconditional fatherly love. For a few fleeting, perfect months, the massive mansion actually felt like a real home. But the universe is rarely that kind to those born as underdogs. Without any prior warning, the seemingly perfectly healthy billionaire collapsed at his desk in his private study. He was rushed to the hospital in a panic, falling into a deep, medically inexplicable coma. The elite team of doctors murmured anxiously about acute, sudden heart failure. The lavish VIP suite was quickly filled with the terrifying, rhythmic, mechanical beeping of life support machines. And the exact moment his eyes closed, the nightmare truly began for the little girl. Victoria seized absolute, unquestioned control of the massive estate with terrifying speed. The cruel stepmother immediately dismissed his loyal staff and systematically isolated the child from the outside world. She turned the sterile hospital suite into a suffocating psychological prison. The 8-year-old girl, who had just miraculously found her savior, was now trapped in the gilded cage of a monster. And the brutal battle for survival was about to enter its darkest, most dangerous chapter. The heavy, soundproof mahogany doors of the VIP intensive care unit slammed shut, sealing the 8-year-old girl inside a terrifying new reality. The luxurious hospital suite, occupying the entire top floor of the prestigious Manhattan Medical Center, was designed to offer absolute privacy to the ultra-wealthy. Now it served as a gilded, airtight tomb. Victoria moved through the sterile space like a predatory leopard surveying its freshly conquered territory. She reeked of expensive Chanel perfume, a sickly sweet floral scent that aggressively masked the underlying odor of clinical antiseptics and impending death. She did not shed a single tear for the man lying tethered to a dozen life support machines. Instead, she immediately began barking orders at the world-class medical staff with the vicious authority of a dictator. She fired the billionaire's personal, trusted nurses on the spot, replacing them with a private, tight-lipped security detail that answered only to her. She instructed the head cardiologist, a man with decades of experience, to speak only when spoken to and to immediately hand over all medical proxy documents. Within 24 hours, Victoria had constructed an impenetrable fortress of wealth and legal red tape around the comatose patriarch, ensuring absolutely no one from the outside world could reach him. And most importantly, she ensured that the little black girl was utterly, hopelessly trapped inside with her. With the medical staff cowed into submission and the bodyguards stationed outside the doors, Victoria finally turned her full, devastating attention to the child. She did not raise a hand to strike the girl. Physical violence was far too crude, too common for a woman of her aristocratic pedigree. Victoria specialized in the dark art of psychological destruction. She slowly walked over to the corner where the terrified child was huddled on a stiff leather sofa. Victoria leaned down, her flawless, pale face hovering just inches away from the little girl. The stepmother's icy blue eyes were devoid of any human warmth, reflecting only a bottomless well of racist disgust and elitist superiority. "Do you know why he is lying there dying in that bed?" Victoria whispered, her voice a soft, venomous hiss that echoed perfectly in the quiet room. "It is because of you." His heart was strong and perfect until he dragged a piece of ghetto trash into his immaculate home. You infected his life. You are a parasite just like that pathetic, impoverished woman who birthed you. You both thought you could climb out of the gutter and steal a piece of my empire. But look at where your filthy genetics have gotten you. She is dead in the dirt, he is a brain-dead vegetable. And you are entirely at my mercy. The words were designed to annihilate the child's spirit, to break her mind before she even had a chance to understand the game being played. The little girl pressed her back hard against the leather cushions, her small chest heaving with silent, repressed sobs. She wanted to scream, she wanted to run to her father and beg him to wake up, but the sheer, overwhelming terror radiating from the white woman paralyzed her. Victoria smiled, a terrifying, triumphant stretching of her thin lips, reveling in the absolute power she held over the helpless minority child. For the next several days, the psychological torture escalated into a chilling routine of profound isolation. Victoria treated the girl not as a human being, but as a disgusting, invisible plague. She forbade the child from sitting on the expensive furniture, forcing her to sit on the cold, hard linoleum floor in the darkest corner of the expansive suite. When gourmet meals were brought in by private caterers for Victoria, she would sit at the elegant glass table, meticulously cutting her medium-rare steak and sipping vintage red wine. She would completely ignore the hungry gaze of the little girl. Instead of offering proper food, Victoria would deliberately leave half-eaten scraps on a paper plate, placing it on the floor near the bathroom door as if feeding a stray, unwanted dog. The message was excruciatingly clear. You are not family, you are not human, you are an animal that belongs on the ground. If the little girl dared to inch closer to her father's bed, hoping to hold his warm, unresponsive hand, Victoria would snap her manicured fingers. A towering silent bodyguard would immediately step in, physically blocking the child with a massive wall of muscle. "You do not have the right to touch him with your dirty hands," Victoria would sneer from across the room, idly flipping through a high-fashion magazine. "You carry the stench of the pavement. Do not contaminate my husband's sterile environment." The emotional starvation was far worse than the physical hunger. The little girl was completely cut off from the sun, from fresh air, from a single word of kindness. She was drowning in an ocean of white privilege and unchecked arrogance. Victoria spent her days loudly coordinating with ruthless corporate lawyers over the phone, openly discussing the liquidation of the billionaire's assets. She talked about the little girl as if she were a minor pest control problem that would soon be permanently eradicated once the life support machines were legally unplugged.
Oh, God.
Victoria was so blindingly arrogant, so entirely convinced of her own supreme intelligence and the child's inherent racial inferiority that she made a fatal miscalculation. She assumed the quiet, trembling girl sitting on the floor was nothing more than a broken, stupid street urchin. She failed to realize that surviving the freezing, unforgiving winters of the slums required a level of sharp, hyper-vigilant intelligence that no expensive boarding school could ever teach. Victoria's hubris was her absolute armor. She flaunted her cruelty because she genuinely believed there were no consequences for people of her tax bracket. She would often parade her wealthy, equally vapid socialite friends through the VIP suite under the guise of offering emotional support. They would stand around the billionaire's bed, dripping in diamonds and dripping with fake sympathy, while covertly sipping expensive champagne. And every single time, Victoria would make it a point to humiliate the child in front of her elite audience. "Oh, do ignore the little shadow in the corner," Victoria would laugh lightly, gesturing with her crystal flute towards the girl huddled on the floor. "My husband, bless his bleeding, confused heart, took in a charity case right before his tragic collapse. It is a dreadful burden, really. The child cannot even read a simple children's book, let alone comprehend basic hygiene. We are just waiting for the proper authorities to come and cart her off to the state orphanage where her kind truly belongs." The socialites would gasp in manufactured horror, casting disgusted, pitying glances at the 8-year-old. They whispered amongst themselves about the tragedy of bad bloodlines and the dangers of mixing with the lower classes. The little girl absorbed every single toxic word, every hateful stare, locking them away in her mind. She did not break. The memory of her mother's calloused, hard-working hands and the heavy rusted necklace resting against her own heartbeat kept her grounded. Victoria thought she was systematically destroying a child. In reality, she was slowly, unwittingly forging a brilliant, desperate survivor into a lethal weapon of absolute vengeance. The silent, suffocating days dragged on, setting the stage for a deadly game of cat and mouse where the stakes were nothing less than a multi-billion-dollar empire and a father's very life. Underneath the fear, behind those wide, tear-filled eyes, the little girl was watching. She was listening, and she was beginning to notice something deeply, incredibly wrong with the afternoon tea her wicked stepmother prepared every single day. Survival on the unforgiving streets of the financial district had gifted the 8-year-old girl with something no elite boarding school could ever provide. It had forged within her the razor-sharp, hyper-vigilant instincts of a hunted animal. When you grow up sleeping on freezing concrete, your senses become your only line of defense. You learn to read the micro-expressions of a drunk businessman before he kicks your cardboard box. You learn to distinguish the sound of a police cruiser's engine from a regular taxi blocks away. You learn to smell danger in the air before it even materializes. And right now, crouched in the suffocating darkness of the VIP suite's corner, every single survival instinct in her small, battered body was screaming at her. The danger was not in the alleyways anymore. It was standing right in front of her, pouring tea from a priceless antique porcelain pot. Every afternoon at precisely 4 o'clock, the sterile, depressing routine of the hospital room was interrupted by Victoria's bizarre, macabre tea ritual. The wicked stepmother would dismiss the imposing bodyguards to the outer hallway, claiming she needed absolute privacy for her grief. She would lock the heavy mahogany door with a resounding click that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Then, she would open her imported leather briefcase and bring out a custom-made bone china tea set. Victoria always insisted on personally preparing a special, holistic herbal infusion for her comatose husband. She haughtily told the terrified doctors that it was a rare, ancient European remedy designed to stimulate brain activity, and strictly forbade any medical staff from interfering or testing it. Because of her immense wealth and the army of ruthless lawyers backing her every move, the hospital administration blindly complied, too terrified of a lawsuit to question the grieving billionaire's wife. But the little black girl, watching silently from her designated spot on the cold linoleum floor, knew exactly what a liar looked like. She had seen countless hustlers, con artists, and thieves operating in the shadows of the slums. Victoria moved with the exact same predatory, calculated grace. The girl watched, her dark eyes wide and unblinking, as Victoria meticulously prepared the brew. The stepmother would draw a small, unmarked glass vial from the hidden depths of her designer handbag. Her perfectly manicured fingers, adorned with diamonds bought with the billionaire's money, would carefully unscrew the cap. She would measure out exactly 3 drops of a thick, perfectly clear liquid into the steaming cup of herbal tea. It was the smell that gave it away. The luxurious VIP suite was heavily sanitized, constantly pumping out the overwhelming chemical scent of medical-grade bleach and lavender air fresheners. But the moment Victoria uncapped that tiny, unmarked vial, a new, distinct odor cut through the clinical atmosphere. The little girl flared her nostrils, her sharp senses locking onto the scent. It was a bizarre, unnatural smell. It carried the faint, sweet aroma of roasted bitter almonds, aggressively mixed with the sharp, metallic tang of rusted copper. It was a smell the girl had never encountered in a kitchen, but she recognized it instantly from the darkest corners of the city's industrial waste dumps. It was a toxic, unnatural stench that made her stomach churn violently and her throat tighten in a primal panic. Victoria, completely blinded by her own staggering arrogance and deeply ingrained racism, never even considered that the impoverished child in the corner could be a threat. To Victoria, the girl was virtually invisible, a subhuman creature entirely incapable of complex thought or deductive reasoning. She did not bother to hide her actions. She did not bother to mask her true emotions. As Victoria carried the steaming cup of tainted tea toward the life support machines, the little girl witnessed a terrifying transformation. The stepmother's mask of the grieving, devastated wife instantly melted away. In its place, a chilling, triumphant half-smile twisted her pale features. It was a look of pure, unadulterated evil. It was the look of a predator watching its prey slowly bleed to death in a trap. Using a specialized medical dropper, Victoria carefully administered the liquid into the billionaire's feeding tube. The girl watched her father's chest rise and fall mechanically, entirely dependent on the humming machines. She remembered the days leading up to his sudden catastrophic collapse. She remembered how his vibrant, powerful energy had begun to inexplicably drain away. She remembered the severe headaches he complained of, the sudden bouts of dizziness, and the strange metallic taste he mentioned during his final breakfasts. And she remembered that those symptoms only began after Victoria had aggressively fired his longtime personal chef, insisting on personally overseeing his diet to ensure his optimal health. The horrifying truth crashed into the 8-year-old's mind with the force of a speeding freight train. Her father, the powerful titan of Wall Street who had rescued her from the freezing gutters, had not suffered a random tragic heart attack. He was being methodically, intentionally murdered. The woman in the expensive white suit was slowly poisoning him to death, drop by agonizing drop, keeping him suspended in a coma just long enough to legally drain every single penny from his vast financial empire. And once the money was secured and the machines were finally turned off, Victoria would undoubtedly dispose of the little girl, the only remaining biological heir, sending her back to the streets or worse. A profound, icy realization settled over the child. There was no one coming to save them. The doctors were compromised by fear, the bodyguards were paid mercenaries, and the outside world was completely oblivious, blinded by Victoria's carefully crafted public relations narrative. If she simply sat there and cried, if she gave in to the overwhelming terror radiating from her wicked stepmother, her father would die, and her mother's desperate, heartbreaking sacrifices would have been for absolutely nothing. The memory of her mother's worn, bleeding hands and the heavy rusted metal necklace resting against her chest ignited a fierce, unquenchable fire in her soul. The little girl wiped away a stray tear, her expression hardening into a mask of pure, hardened resolve. The street urchin was gone. In her place was a brilliantly sharp, deeply observant survivor who was about to turn the elite's most fatal weakness, their boundless, blinding arrogance, into a lethal weapon against them. She began to meticulously scan the room, noting the blind spots of the security cameras, the rotation schedule of the guards, and the exact dimensions of the air conditioning vent above her head. The counterattack had quietly begun. The relentless, mechanical rhythm of the life support machines became the soundtrack of the little girl's silent rebellion. It was well past midnight, and the sterile hospital suite was bathed in the eerie, pale blue glow of the medical monitors. Victoria sat on a plush velvet armchair across the room, aggressively scrolling through her latest offshore bank statements on her tablet. The wicked stepmother was completely consumed by her own boundless greed, meticulously calculating the exact hour she could legally declare her husband brain dead and seize his empire. She assumed the 8-year-old girl huddled in the far corner was fast asleep, utterly defeated by the crushing psychological isolation. Victoria vastly underestimated the resilience of a child who had learned to sleep with one eye open in the freezing, dangerous alleyways of the city. The girl was not sleeping. Her dark eyes were wide open, tracking every single microscopic movement the wealthy woman made. The golden opportunity finally arrived when Victoria's private, encrypted smartphone buzzed violently on the glass table. The screen flashed the name of her lead corporate attorney. Knowing she was about to discuss highly illegal asset liquidations and wire transfers, Victoria needed absolute privacy. She sneered in the direction of the child, ensuring the girl was still tucked away in the shadows, before rising from her chair. Victoria haughtily smoothed the wrinkles from her silk designer blouse and briskly walked out onto the suite's enclosed, soundproof glass balcony. She slid the heavy glass door completely shut behind her, sealing herself inside a private bubble of elitist corruption. In her blinding arrogance, Victoria made a fatal amateur mistake. She left her customized, outrageously expensive Hermes Birkin bag sitting wide open on the velvet armchair. This was the moment. The little girl knew she had only a terrifyingly narrow window of a few minutes before the stepmother finished her illicit phone call. The child slowly rose from the cold linoleum floor. Her small, fragile body ached from days of deliberate neglect and forced immobility, but her mind was sharper than a diamond cutter. She moved across the expansive room without making a single sound. It was a stealthy ghost-like glide that she had perfected while dodging ruthless night watchmen and territorial street gangs in the slums. She kept her body low, using the large, intimidating medical equipment as cover, her eyes constantly darting toward the glass balcony where Victoria was aggressively pacing and arguing into her phone. The little girl reached the velvet armchair. The contrast was incredibly jarring. Her tiny, calloused hands, still bearing the faint scars of severe frostbite, hovered over the butter-soft, imported leather of a handbag that cost more than an entire city block of low-income housing. She did not hesitate. She plunged her small hand into the dark depths of the designer bag. She bypassed the solid gold makeup compacts, the platinum credit cards, and the diamond-encrusted pens. She was searching for something very specific. Her sensitive fingers finally brushed against a small, cold, cylindrical object tucked away in a hidden silk pocket. She pulled it out into the dim blue light of the medical monitors. It was the heavy glass vial. It had no medical label, no prescription details, absolutely nothing to indicate it belonged in a hospital. The girl carefully, with surgical precision, unscrewed the tight metal cap just a fraction of an inch. Instantly, the terrifying, unnatural stench flooded her senses again. The sickeningly sweet aroma of roasted bitter almonds violently clashed with the harsh, rusty tang of oxidized metal. It was undeniable. The toxic scent burned her nostrils, confirming her darkest, most horrifying suspicion. The elegant white woman on the balcony was a cold-blooded murderer, slowly executing a beloved father right in front of his helpless daughter. The little girl tightly screwed the cap back on and carefully returned the vial to the exact position she had found it in the silk pocket. She knew that simply stealing the poison would accomplish absolutely nothing. Victoria would merely purchase another batch, and the police would never, ever believe the frantic accusations of a Black Street orphan over the polished, heavily funded lies of a billionaire's wife. She needed irrefutable proof. She needed a confession. As she crouched behind the armchair, her hyper-observant eyes scanned the room for any possible advantage. Her gaze landed on the high-tech, hospital-grade security camera mounted in the upper corner of the ceiling. It was supposed to monitor the VIP patient 24 hours a day. But the little girl noticed something highly suspicious. The small red LED indicator light on the camera was completely dead. Victoria, using her immense wealth and intimidating authority, had clearly ordered the hospital administration to disable the primary surveillance feed under the guise of protecting her husband's absolute privacy. But Victoria, for all her elite education and manipulative cunning, was not technically savvy. She had only instructed the guards to pull the main power cord from the wall socket. The little girl's eyes followed the thick black wire down to the media console. She noticed a secondary, heavily concealed emergency backup battery switch tucked behind a ventilation panel. It was a fail-safe mechanism designed for power outages, completely overlooked by the arrogant stepmother. A brilliant, incredibly dangerous plan began to rapidly form in the child's mind. Suddenly, the muffled sound of the heavy glass door sliding open shattered the silence. Victoria had abruptly finished her phone call. Panic flared in the little girl's chest, but her street-forged instincts completely took over. She dropped flat onto her stomach and smoothly slid underneath the massive, mechanical hospital bed just a split second before Victoria stepped back into the room. The child held her breath, pressing her face against the cold floor tiles. The heavy, oppressive scent of Chanel perfume immediately filled the space. She watched Victoria's sharp, designer stiletto heels aggressively pace back and forth mere inches from her face. The stepmother was muttering viciously under her breath, cursing the lawyers for a slight delay in transferring the billionaire's private funds to a Swiss account. Lying in the suffocating darkness beneath the bed, right beneath the failing heartbeat of the only man who had ever loved her. The 8-year-old girl made a silent, unbreakable vow. She was not going to run. She was not going to cry. She was going to use Victoria's own blinding, toxic prejudice as the ultimate weapon. The elite always assumed the poor were stupid. And that devastatingly arrogant assumption was exactly how this vicious, murderous woman was going to destroy her own life. The heavy rhythmic pacing of Victoria's designer stilettos suddenly came to a dead, terrifying halt. A suffocating silence fell over the VIP hospital suite, broken only by the mechanical breathing of the life support machines. Underneath the massive bed, the little girl held her breath until her lungs burned. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying to the spirit of her mother that the wicked stepmother would just walk away. But the elite are exceptionally good at spotting anything that ruins their perfect, meticulously curated aesthetics. Victoria had noticed a tiny muddy footprint on the edge of the pristine white Persian rug, leading directly toward the bed. A chilling, cruel laugh echoed through the sterile room, cutting through the silence like a sharp knife. Well, 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 what do we have here?" Victoria purred, her voice dripping with a predatory, sickly sweetness. "Are we playing a little game of hide and seek, you filthy little street rat? Get out from under there right this second, before I call my heavily armed guards to drag you out by your matted hair." The 8-year-old girl knew that defying a direct order would only escalate the immediate physical danger. She slowly, awkwardly scrambled out from beneath the heavy metal frame of the hospital bed. She stood up, brushing the dust off her oversized, tattered sweater, refusing to look down at the floor. She kept her chin raised, her dark eyes locked fiercely onto the wealthy woman's icy blue glare. Victoria looked at the child with a mixture of profound disgust and absolute, unquestioned superiority. "Were you trying to steal my jewelry, you little thief?" Victoria sneered, stepping dangerously close to the small child. "Is that what your pathetic dead mother taught you to do in those disgusting rat-infested slums?" The little girl felt a hot flash of anger at the vicious mention of her mother, but she forced herself to remain perfectly still. "I was not stealing anything," the girl whispered, intentionally making her voice sound small, broken, and terrified. "I just wanted to be near my father." Victoria rolled her eyes dramatically, letting out a sharp, theatrical sigh of supreme annoyance. "Your father," Victoria mocked, gesturing lazily toward the comatose billionaire on the bed with her diamond-clad hand. "Look at him. He is a vegetable. He is a useless, broken machine taking up extremely valuable space in my world. And you are nothing but a temporary, highly irritating complication that I am about to permanently erase from existence." The little girl knew this was her only chance to execute her desperate, high-stakes plan. She needed to keep Victoria talking. She needed to aggressively stroke the woman's blinding, narcissistic ego. She slowly backed away, deliberately moving her small body toward the media console tucked in the far corner of the room. "Why is he so sick?" the girl asked, letting fake tears well up in her large, dark eyes, making herself look as helpless as possible. "The doctors said his heart was strong when he brought me home." "The doctors are absolute fools," Victoria laughed, a cold, harsh sound that lacked any trace of human empathy. "They are highly paid idiots who only see what my lawyers and I allow them to see." The intoxicating thrill of absolute power was getting the better of the wicked stepmother. Victoria was entirely convinced that she had already won the ultimate game of corporate thrones. She looked at the trembling black child and saw nothing but an uneducated, completely powerless victim. She desperately wanted to gloat, to showcase her supreme, untouchable brilliance to someone who could truly appreciate the horror of her genius. "He did not just magically get sick, you stupid little girl," Victoria whispered, her eyes flashing with a manic, murderous pride. "I made him sick. I meticulously researched a highly specific, totally untraceable botanical extract that mimics sudden heart failure. I imported it through a private, anonymous shell corporation in Eastern Europe just for him. 3 little drops in his pathetic herbal tea every afternoon, and his precious, perfect heart simply forgot how to beat. It smells terribly like bitter almonds, but masked with his disgusting tea, he drank it down like a loyal, obedient dog. The little girl gasped, covering her mouth with her small, calloused hands, feigning absolute, paralyzing shock. She continued to back up, her spine finally pressing heavily against the cold metal casing of the media console. Her small hand blindly reached behind her back, her fingers desperately searching the smooth surface for the hidden ventilation panel. "You are killing him?" The child sobbed loudly, maximizing the volume of her fake, desperate despair. "Why would you do that to him?" "Because he is weak, and because I deserve every single penny he has built," Victoria snarled, stepping forward to loom menacingly over the terrified child. "He actually thought he could bring a piece of ghetto trash into my pristine home and force me to play the loving mother. He thought he could dilute my pure, aristocratic bloodline with your filthy, poverty-stricken genetics. But I am Victoria Sinclair. I am the elite. I am untouchable. I take what I want, and I completely destroy anyone who dares to stand in my way." The little girl's fingers frantically traced the edge of the panel, finally slipping through the narrow plastic slats. She felt the cold, hard switch of the hospital's emergency backup battery system. "By tomorrow morning, I will legally pull the plug on those annoying machines," Victoria declared proudly, completely lost in her own villainous monologue. "I will inherit every single billion-dollar asset, every luxury property, every corporate stock. And you? You will be thrown into a state-run mental asylum for severely traumatized orphans. Nobody will ever believe a single word you say about the poison. Who is the world going to trust? A grieving, beautiful, highly educated widow from a prestigious historical family? Or a delusional, filthy street urchin trying to blame her wealthy stepmother for a tragic medical anomaly?" As Victoria delivered her final, devastatingly cruel rhetorical question, the little girl's thumb pressed hard against the hidden switch. There was a very faint, almost inaudible click that was entirely masked by the hum of the life support machines. High above them, mounted in the upper corner of the ceiling, the small red LED indicator light on the hospital-grade security camera suddenly flickered to life. It instantly connected to the hospital's secure, closed-circuit servers. The camera's high-definition lens panned silently, locking directly onto Victoria's triumphant, evil smile. The entire horrifying confession, complete with Victoria's manic facial expressions and detailed admission of poisoning, was now permanently recorded. It captured the undeniable proof that would soon completely dismantle her luxurious, protected existence. The lethal trap was officially set. The little girl instantly stopped crying. She slowly lowered her hands from her face, staring up at the wealthy, arrogant woman who mistakenly thought she had just conquered the world. The terrified, weeping street urchin vanished entirely, replaced by a brilliant, cold, and highly calculated survivor. Victoria noticed the sudden, chilling shift in the child's demeanor, a brief flicker of genuine confusion crossing her perfectly contoured face. But before the stepmother could verbally process the change, the heavy mahogany doors of the VIP suite swung open. A stern-looking nurse entered, carrying a fresh tray of medical supplies, completely oblivious to the deadly psychological warfare that had just taken place. Victoria instantly snapped back into her flawless, grieving widow persona, dramatically wiping a fake tear from her eye. But the little girl just stood silently in the corner, a dangerous, knowing glint in her dark eyes. The countdown to Victoria's absolute, humiliating public destruction had officially begun. Time moved inside the billionaire's VIP hospital suite, with the agonizing, suffocating weight of an invisible torture device. At precisely 4 o'clock the following afternoon, the air froze once again, marking the darkest hour of a meticulously calculated conspiracy. The weak, pale light of the Manhattan sunset bled through the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the skyscraper, casting long, grotesque shadows across the bloodless, dying face of the tycoon who lay completely motionless on his life support bed. Victoria swept into the room like a ruthless queen returning from a highly successful blood-soaked campaign. Today was the final act, the day she would put a permanent end to her perfect little charade. The high-stakes legal paperwork and fraudulent offshore asset transfers had been successfully finalized by her army of corrupt attorneys earlier that morning. Now, all that stood between her and absolute control of a multi-billion-dollar empire was delivering the final fatal dose of poison to her comatose husband, ensuring his eyes would never open again. She casually tossed her custom-made, alligator skin handbag onto the central table and slowly began arranging her priceless royal bone china tea set. Every single movement Victoria made oozed the effortless elegance and unearned privilege of the ultra-wealthy elite, but the raw, unadulterated cruelty radiating from her icy blue eyes was enough to make anyone's blood run cold. She reached into her Chanel jacket and retrieved the tiny, unmarked glass vial of toxic botanicals. With diamond-encrusted rings catching the fading sunlight, her manicured fingers carefully measured out exactly 3 drops of the clear, deadly liquid, letting them fall silently into the steaming cup of herbal tea. Instantly, that terrifying, unnatural stench flooded the sterile environment once more. The sickeningly sweet aroma of roasted bitter almonds violently clashed with the harsh, metallic tang of oxidized copper, twisting through the rising steam. It was the scent of absolute murder masked in luxury, a quiet death sentence designed to leave absolutely no trace for the forensic pathologists. From the deepest shadows of the room, tucked away behind a massive medical storage cabinet, the 8-year-old girl sat in absolute silence. Her large, dark eyes, wide and unblinking, tracked her wicked stepmother's every predatory move. The child's tiny heart was hammering frantically against her ribs like a trapped bird. But her mind remained impossibly sharp, forged by the brutal survival rules of the streets. Living in the freezing alleyways had taught her that panic was the ultimate ally of the enemy. She knew for a fact that the emergency backup security camera high above was silently recording, capturing irrefutable digital evidence of Victoria's treasonous crime. But she also knew that video footage alone wasn't enough to save her father's life right now. The moment Victoria poured that poisoned liquid into his feeding tube, his weakened heart would permanently stop before the police could ever break down the doors. She had to act. She needed a distraction, and she had a window of no more than 5 agonizing seconds to completely rewrite the rules of the game. Victoria tightly capped the lethal vial, slipped it back into her purse, and turned toward the hospital bed with a triumphant, evil smirk playing on her lips. But just as her designer stiletto heels prepared to cross the threshold into the dying sunlight, a violent, deafening crash shattered the silence of the executive medical wing. Crash. The unmistakable sound of heavy, expensive porcelain exploding against a hard surface echoed through the door, followed immediately by the panicked, high-pitched scream of a terrified residency nurse. This chaotic interruption was no accident of fate. It was a flawless, high-stakes trap engineered entirely by the billionaire's brilliant daughter. Using her street-honed wits, the little girl had secretly scavenged a thin, nearly invisible spool of heavy-duty nylon fishing wire from a maintenance worker's forgotten toolkit earlier that morning. She had stealthily tied one end of the wire around the base of a massive, top-heavy antique ceramic vase decorating the public hallway outside. She then ran the rest of the line under the crack of the VIP suite's heavy mahogany door, pulling it tight all the way to her dark corner. With one sudden, powerful, and perfectly timed yank from inside the room, the $1,000 vase had plunged violently onto the marble floor outside, creating a flawless, high-society disaster. Victoria's manicured composure instantly shattered into a wave of absolute, aristocratic fury. As a member of the untouchable elite, she utterly loathed any form of lower-class incompetence, inconvenience, or loud noise, especially at the exact moment she was executing the most important murder of her life. With an angry snarl escaping her throat, she slammed the poisoned cup down onto the round glass table in the center of the room. She spun around on her heels, her eyes flashing with murderous rage. "You incompetent, brainless peasants! What on earth are you doing out there?" Victoria roared through clenched teeth, taking long, aggressive strides toward the heavy doors, ripping them open to unleash her toxic temper on the staff outside. As the heavy door swung partially shut behind her, time in the VIP suite completely ground to a halt. The 5-second countdown of life and death had officially begun. The exact millisecond Victoria's back vanished past the doorway, the 8-year-old girl exploded out of the shadows like a shadow tearing through the night. Her bare feet, calloused and hardened from years of running through the frozen concrete jungle to sell newspapers, glided across the polished linoleum floor without making a single solitary sound. She moved like a ghost, an instrument of absolute cosmic justice, rising from the depths of systemic oppression. In less than 2 seconds, she breached the perimeter of the glass table. Sitting on the reflective surface were 2 identical porcelain cups, matching perfectly in color, design, and intricate gold trim. One held the lethal bitter almond poison Victoria had prepared for the murder. The other held a fresh, completely safe cup of herbal tea the little girl had secretly brewed and hidden inside a spare medical tray hours before. The child's hands were shaking violently under the crushing psychological pressure, but her eyes were as cold and steady as hardened steel. For seconds, her small hands darted forward, grabbing the poisoned cup meant for her father and seamlessly swapping its position with the safe tea. To ensure the wicked woman couldn't easily destroy the chemical evidence later, the girl quickly used a medical syringe to draw out a concentrated sample of the poisoned liquid, injecting it into a small thermos hidden beneath her oversized sweater. 3 seconds. She carefully adjusted the handles of the cups, aligning them to the exact millimeter to match how Victoria had left them, ensuring not a single detail looked disturbed. 2 seconds. She used a sterile wipe to instantly clean a stray droplet from the glass table, leaving the surface immaculate. 1 second. She vanished back into her dark corner, melting into the shadows, forcing her rapid breathing into a state of absolute calm, masking her face in a perfect illusion of terrified innocence. The heavy mahogany door was violently thrown open once more. Victoria stormed back into the room, her chest heaving with elitist disgust after hurling a barrage of cruel, classist insults at the crying nurse outside. She locked the door behind her with a definitive click, pulling a silk handkerchief from her pocket to wipe her hands as if she had just touched something profoundly contagious. She walked directly over to the glass table, completely and utterly devoid of suspicion. In Victoria's deeply racist, elitist worldview, this entire hospital was her personal fiefdom under her total control, and a dirty, uneducated black street orphan was nothing more than a subhuman creature entirely incapable of higher cognitive thought, let alone executing a high-speed, flawless swap right under her nose. With absolute arrogance blinding her judgment, Victoria proudly lifted the cup she believed contained the deadly poison. She watched the aromatic steam rise with a look of supreme psychotic triumph, the look of a titan who believed she had just conquered fate itself through raw aristocratic ruthlessness. "Time to end this little fairy tale, my dear wealthy husband," Victoria whispered with a chilling sweet venom, taking slow, deliberate steps toward the billionaire's bed. She was completely oblivious to the fact that the entire universe had just flipped on its axis. The cup in her hand was no longer a weapon against her husband. It was a one-way ticket to her own absolute destruction. And from the darkness of the corner, the little girl watched, a cold, dangerous smile touching her lips, ready for the ultimate act of poetic justice. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut, sealing the absolute silence of the VIP medical suite once more. Victoria stood in the center of the room, a picture of flawless aristocratic elegance, holding the delicate gold-rimmed porcelain cup. A sinister, triumphant smile stretched across her perfectly contoured face as she prepared to cross the threshold toward the billionaire's bed to deliver the final fatal dose. But just as the sharp heel of her designer stiletto caught the last ray of the dying Manhattan sunset, a voice cut through the sterile mechanical hum of the room. It wasn't the trembling, broken whisper of a terrified child. It was a voice that was impossibly calm, chillingly steady, and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "Put the cup down, Victoria. Do you honestly believe you can methodically murder my father, steal his entire life's work, and just walk away into the sunset?" Victoria froze. A violent shockwave rattled her spine, anchoring her expensive shoes to the floor. The smile vanished from her face, replaced by a sudden jarring wave of disbelief. Slowly, deliberately, she turned on her heels to face the dark corner of the room. Standing there, stepping out of the shadows and into the pale amber light, was the 8-year-old girl. She was no longer huddled in fear. Her posture was erect, her shoulders thrown back, and her large dark eyes burned with a fierce, unbreakable intelligence. The illusion of the helpless street orphan had completely shattered. In her place stood a lethal adversary. Victoria forced a harsh, mocking laugh to escape her throat, desperately trying to reassert her elite dominance over the room. "What did you just say to me, you ungrateful little parasite? How dare you speak my name with that filthy mouth? You are nothing but a charity case my husband dragged out of the gutter. You have absolutely no right to even look at me, let alone utter such delusional lies." The little girl didn't flinch. She took a slow, calculated step forward, her bare feet silent against the linoleum floor. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of absolute, undeniable doom. "Exactly 3 drops, the child said, her eyes locked onto Victoria's paling face. 3 drops of a highly specific, totally untraceable botanical extract imported through an anonymous shell corporation in Eastern Europe. A poison that mimics acute, sudden heart failure, smelling aggressively of roasted bitter almonds and pennies, designed to fool the best cardiologists in New York. Tell me, Victoria, do I need to recite the exact account number of the Swiss bank where your lawyers transferred my father's corporate funds at 9 o'clock this morning?" The color instantly drained from Victoria's face, leaving her pristine white skin looking like an unpolished marble tombstone. Her breath hitched in her throat. The untouchable, highly educated heiress was suddenly staring into the eyes of a child who possessed secrets that could utterly destroy her life. The staggering arrogance that had protected Victoria for decades began to fracture, exposing a raw, ugly panic beneath the surface. You were awake," Victoria hissed through clenched teeth, her hands tightening around the fragile porcelain saucer until her knuckles turned white. Her icy blue eyes darted around the empty room, looking for any sign of a trap. But her narcissistic hubris quickly fought its way back to the surface. She looked at the small black girl and reminded herself of the brutal reality of the world they lived in. "So what if you heard me?" Victoria sneered, her voice dropping into a vicious, low growl. "Who do you think the world is going to believe? A dirty, uneducated street rat with no status, no money, and no family? Or me. I am Victoria Sinclair. My family helped build this city. There are no witnesses in this room. There is no one coming to save you. I can simply pour this tea down the drain, call my security guards, and have you dragged to a lockdown asylum before the sun completely sets. You have nothing. The little girl slowly tilted her head, a flash of genuine pity crossing her brilliant dark eyes. She didn't argue. Instead, she simply raised her small hand and pointed a single finger toward the high ceiling in the far corner of the room, right behind where Victoria was standing. I don't need a witness, Victoria, the child whispered softly. Look behind you. Look at the camera. Victoria spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. High above the media console, the hospital-grade security lens was pointing directly at her. And right beneath the glass dome, a tiny bright red LED light was pulsing steadily in the darkness. The emergency backup battery, the girl explained, a cold, knowing smile finally touching her lips. Your guards pulled the main power cord from the wall, but they completely forgot about the failsafe switch hidden behind the ventilation panel. It's been running since midnight. Your entire confession from last night, your frantic phone calls to your lawyers, and the exact moment you opened your purse to poison that cup. It has all been recorded. It's currently streaming directly to the hospital's secure, off-site cloud servers. My father's legal team already has the file. Your money can't delete it. Your lawyers can't hide it. Absolute terror seized Victoria's mind. The walls of her pristine, perfect empire were caving in on her. She looked at the pulsing red light, then down at the cup of tea in her hands. A manic, desperate thought exploded in her brain. She had to destroy the physical evidence. If she consumed the tea or poured it out, her lawyers could argue that the video was a deepfake, a technological fabrication meant to ruin her reputation. She needed to prove right here and now that the tea was entirely harmless. Sensing the woman's desperate train of thought, the little girl delivered the ultimate psychological masterstroke. She aggressively stoked Victoria's elitist pride, laying down a trap that the stepmother's immense ego could never resist. Are you going to pour it out to hide your crime? The child challenged, her voice dripping with calculated defiance. Or are you going to drink it to prove your innocence? But I should warn you, Victoria. When you stormed out of this room to scream at the residency nurse, I had exactly 5 seconds alone. The clean tea I secretly brewed this morning is hidden in my sweater. The cup you are holding right now contains your own 3 drops of bitter almond poison. Go ahead. Drink it. Prove to me that your elite bloodline is as untouchable as you think it is. The accusation hung in the sterile air like a thick fog. Victoria's mind raced at a frantic, chaotic speed. She looked at the identical porcelain cups on the table, then back at the liquid in her hand. Her brain screamed, "It's a bluff. She's a child, a stupid street urchin trying to scare me into dropping the evidence. There is absolutely no way an 8-year-old could execute a flawless chemical swap and clean the scene in under 5 seconds. She is playing a desperate game of street poker, trying to save her dying father." The deeply ingrained racism and profound classist superiority that defined Victoria's entire existence became her ultimate undoing. Her hubris refused to accept that a minority child from the slums could ever outsmart her. She wanted to crush this girl's spirit once and for all. She wanted to watch the hope vanish from those defiant dark eyes when she proved that her elite status was absolutely invincible. You think your pathetic, cheap street tricks can frighten a Sinclair? Victoria roared, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated madness. Look at me, you miserable little mistake. Look at how I destroy your pathetic little fantasy. With a final desperate act of supreme arrogance, Victoria threw her head back, raised the gold-rimmed porcelain cup to her lips, and aggressively drank every single drop of the warm herbal liquid. She slammed the empty cup down onto the glass table with a resounding shatter, gasping for air, her chest heaving with a sick, twisted sense of victory. "See!" Victoria screamed triumphantly, glaring down at the child. "Nothing happened. You lose, you dirty little liar. I am untouchable." But the triumphant screech died in her throat. The little girl didn't scream. She didn't cry. She slowly folded her small, calloused arms across her chest, stood perfectly still in the amber light, and let a cold, brilliant, and terrifyingly satisfied smile spread across her face. It was the look of a master chess player who had just delivered an absolute checkmate. And in that horrifying second of silence, Victoria felt a sudden icy chill grip the center of her chest, and she realized with absolute certainty that she had just swallowed her own death sentence. The icy chill in the center of Victoria's chest rapidly blossomed into a raging, uncontrollable inferno. The sickeningly sweet taste of roasted bitter almonds, which she had so proudly bragged about just moments before, now coated the back of her throat like burning battery acid. The highly concentrated, untraceable European botanical extract was meticulously designed to be administered in 3 microscopic drops over a large cup of hot tea to slowly, undetectably weaken a strong man's heart. But in her blinding narcissistic rage, Victoria had chugged the entire, heavily concentrated lethal dose all at once. Her pristine, highly educated brain, which she genuinely believed made her vastly superior to everyone else in the room, suddenly realized the catastrophic, fatal error she had just committed. The physiological reaction was horrifyingly instantaneous and brutal. The delicate gold-rimmed porcelain cup slipped from her trembling diamond-clad fingers, shattering into 100 jagged pieces against the cold, sterile linoleum floor. Victoria gasped, a harsh, ragged, desperate sound that echoed terribly in the quiet VIP suite. Her hands frantically clawed at her own throat, leaving deep, bleeding scratch marks on her flawless, extremely expensive pale skin. The poison was aggressively attacking her central nervous system, rapidly constricting her airways and sending her perfectly healthy heart into a violent, erratic, and agonizing frenzy. Her knees violently buckled beneath her, completely unable to support her weight for even a second longer. The untouchable, arrogant, aristocratic heiress collapsed in a pathetic, undignified heap, her expensive white Chanel suit eagerly soaking up the spilled tea and the accumulated dirt on the hospital floor. Absolute, unadulterated terror completely consumed her wide, icy blue eyes. She was suffocating in plain sight, drowning in the immediate, inescapable consequences of her own boundless cruelty and greed. Victoria, the woman who had spent her entire privileged life aggressively looking down on the poor, the weak, and the marginalized, was now writhing on the ground in a state of absolute, pathetic helplessness. She desperately looked up at the 8-year-old black girl standing perfectly still in the pale amber light of the room. Victoria tried to scream, tried to demand with her usual elite authority that the child call for the highly paid doctors, but the only sound that escaped her lips was a wet, gurgling, miserable wheeze. She reached a shaking, desperate hand toward the little girl she had so viciously tormented and abused, silently begging for the exact same mercy she had never, ever shown to anyone else in her entire life. But the little girl did not move a single inch. She did not panic, she did not cry, and she certainly did not reach out to help the monster writhing in agony at her feet. She simply stood there, an immovable pillar of cosmic justice, her dark eyes completely devoid of any sympathy or fear. She remembered the freezing nights sleeping on cardboard boxes on the streets. She remembered the stinging slaps of Victoria's cruel, racist words, and she clearly remembered the sight of her beautiful mother's only photograph being aggressively ground into the Persian rug. "You did this to yourself, Victoria," the 8-year-old whispered, her voice carrying the heavy, haunting, and absolute weight of a supreme judge delivering a final verdict. "My mother always told me that the universe has a way of balancing the scales. You truly thought your money and your skin color made you a god. But in the end, you are just a foolish, hateful, miserable woman who drank her own poison." Suddenly, the suffocating, tense silence of the VIP suite was violently shattered. The heavy, soundproof mahogany doors did not just open. They were aggressively breached with explosive, terrifying force. The thick, expensive wood splintered inward as a highly coordinated, heavily armed tactical unit of the New York Police Department stormed the room. There were no polite, respectful knocks, no deference to the billionaire's immense wealth or social standing. Dozens of heavily armored SWAT officers flooded the space in seconds, the harsh, blinding red beams of their tactical laser sights cutting through the dim hospital lighting like surgical blades. "NYPD. Nobody move. Secure the perimeter," the lead tactical commander roared, his voice booming like thunder and echoing off the walls. The private, highly paid security guards Victoria had stationed outside had already been forcefully disarmed, handcuffed, and pinned aggressively to the marble floor of the hallway. The officers immediately established absolute control of the room, fanning out in a flawless, highly trained tactical formation. They instantly bypassed the small, calm little girl, clearly having been thoroughly briefed on the exact highly sensitive situation. Instead, their heavy, authoritative booted footsteps aggressively surrounded the gasping, dying woman twitching on the floor. Right behind the tactical police team, a specialized unit of emergency paramedics and forensic toxicologists rushed frantically into the suite. They didn't come to comfort the grieving wife. They came with a strict mandate to preserve a high-profile murder suspect for the state penitentiary. They aggressively rolled Victoria onto her back. The once glamorous, untouchable socialite looked absolutely demonic, her face completely pale, her lips turning a sickly, terrifying shade of blue, her eyes rolling back into her head as her body fought a losing battle. "Suspect is in acute cardiac distress. Prepare the counteragent. Push the atropine and secure an airway, right now," the lead paramedic shouted urgently, tearing the collar of Victoria's expensive designer blouse to administer a massive, life-saving injection directly into her seizing chest. They were not saving her out of compassion. They were saving her so she could physically survive to face the absolute, humiliating destruction of her entire elite existence in a federal courtroom. As the powerful medical counteragent painfully shocked Victoria's failing heart back into a steady, reluctant rhythm, an icy, unforgiving set of heavy steel handcuffs was forcefully snapped onto her trembling wrists, locking her securely to the cold metal rails of a transport stretcher. "Victoria Sinclair, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of your husband, massive financial fraud, and severe child endangerment," a stern-faced, uncompromising lead detective declared loudly, reading her Miranda rights directly into her ear as she weakly gasped for air. "You have the right to remain silent, and I highly suggest you use it, because we have your entire, arrogant confession on camera." As the disgraced, handcuffed socialite was roughly wheeled out of the room, completely stripped of her power, her fake dignity, and her luxurious future, a different miraculous sound began to fill the chaotic VIP suite. The rapid, alarming, and erratic beeping of the life support monitors suddenly shifted. The terrible noise stabilized into a strong, steady, and incredibly rhythmic, healthy pulse. The little girl slowly turned around, her heart leaping into her throat. On the massive hospital bed, the powerful titan of Wall Street, the man who was supposed to be completely brain-dead, slowly, painfully opened his eyes. Thanks to the secret encrypted email the little girl had brilliantly managed to send to his fiercely loyal personal attorney, The night before, a trusted, heavily guarded doctor had secretly administered a slow-acting antidote to the billionaire hours ago. They had intentionally allowed Victoria to play out her twisted, murderous fantasy, just long enough to permanently legally trap her in her own inescapable web of lies. The billionaire slowly turned his head on the pillow. He completely bypassed the flashing lights of the police officers, the frantic movements of the doctors, and the absolute chaos of the raid. His tired, tear-filled eyes locked directly onto his brave, brilliantly resilient little girl. He weakly raised a hand, his fingers trembling with profound love and overwhelming relief as they reached out toward her. The horrifying nightmare was finally over. The untouchable elite had fallen, and the young, brilliant underdog had absolutely, unequivocally won the war. The chaotic, spinning red and blue flashing lights of a dozen New York Police Department cruisers violently painted the pristine white walls of the elite Manhattan hospital. It was a scene of absolute, unprecedented chaos that the highly sanitized, heavily guarded VIP wing had never witnessed before. Paramedics forcefully wheeled Victoria Sinclair through the emergency sliding doors, completely bypassing the luxury recovery suites she was accustomed to. Instead, she was rushed directly into a cold, heavily monitored intensive care unit strictly reserved for high-profile criminal suspects in state custody. She was aggressively stabilized by the same medical staff she had mercilessly verbally abused just hours earlier. Her stomach was brutally pumped, and her system was frantically flushed with massive, agonizing doses of chemical counteragents to fight the lethal, untraceable bitter almond extract she had so arrogantly swallowed. Victoria survived the poison. Her heart, though permanently weakened and heavily damaged by the toxic botanical compound, stubbornly continued to beat. But the grim, devastating reality she woke up to was infinitely worse than any swift physical death she could have possibly imagined. When the disgraced, formerly untouchable socialite finally fluttered her icy blue eyes open 2 days later, she was no longer staring at imported silk curtains, crystal chandeliers, or the deferential faces of her highly paid private security detail. She was staring directly at the cold, unyielding, rust-stained steel bars of a maximum security medical holding cell at Rikers Island. There were no plush velvet pillows, no designer hospital gowns, and absolutely no respect for her aristocratic lineage. A seasoned federal prosecutor, flanked by 2 stone-faced, uncompromising NYPD homicide detectives, stood silently at the foot of her uncomfortable, dangerously narrow prison cot. They did not bring her expensive floral arrangements, gourmet catered meals, or sympathetic well wishes from her wealthy friends. They brought a towering, heavy stack of meticulously documented federal indictments that would permanently bury her under a mountain of inescapable legal ruin. The prosecutor did not mince his words. He coldly informed Victoria that her massive, blinding ego had been her ultimate downfall. The emergency backup camera in the VIP suite, which she had so carelessly ignored, had captured every single agonizing second of her deeply racist, wildly arrogant confession. The high-definition audio had perfectly recorded her proudly detailing the exact chemical composition of the poison, the offshore shell companies used to import it, and her horrific, calculated plan to murder her comatose husband while throwing his 8-year-old orphan daughter into a state-run mental asylum. Furthermore, the brilliant little girl had meticulously preserved the original untampered cup of poison tea in her small thermos. Forensic toxicologists had successfully matched the lethal chemical compound in the thermos directly to the terrifying symptoms Victoria herself had experienced, leaving absolutely zero room for her expensive defense attorneys to claim the video was a deepfake or a digital fabrication. The physical evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable, and utterly damning. The social fallout was equally instantaneous and absolutely catastrophic. The elite, ultra-wealthy circles of New York society, the very people Victoria had desperately sought to impress and dominate, turned their backs on her with breathtaking speed. The moment the scandalous, horrifying details of the attempted murder and massive financial fraud leaked to the aggressive tabloid press, she became completely radioactive. Her aristocratic, fiercely proud family publicly disowned her in a blistering press release to protect their own corporate stock prices. The ruthless board of directors at her husband's billion-dollar financial empire immediately froze every single one of her joint bank accounts, aggressively revoked all her platinum credit cards, and filed a massive civil lawsuit to permanently seize all her personal assets as restitution. Victoria Sinclair, the woman who had spent her entire privileged, sheltered life aggressively looking down on the poor, mocking the weak and viciously degrading minorities, was completely stripped of her immense wealth, her fake dignity, and her carefully curated public identity. She was sentenced to life in a maximum security federal penitentiary, without the possibility of parole. She would spend the rest of her miserable, lonely days scrubbing the concrete floors of a prison cafeteria, surrounded by the exact same working-class people she had once so proudly equated to trash. Meanwhile, back in the breathtaking sunlit penthouse overlooking the sprawling expanse of Central Park, a profoundly beautiful and quiet healing process was taking place. The powerful titan of Wall Street, having fully recovered from the insidious effects of the slow-acting poison thanks to the secret antidote, sat comfortably in a large leather armchair. The cold, ruthless, and mechanical billionaire, who had once surrendered his soul to corporate greed, was completely gone. In his place was a deeply humbled, immensely grateful father, who had been given a miraculous, impossible second chance at life. He looked across the expansive, luxurious room at his brave, brilliant 8-year-old daughter. She was no longer wearing the oversized, tattered, and freezing clothes of a desperate street urchin. She was dressed in a comfortable, bright yellow sundress, sitting peacefully by the massive glass window, reading a thick hardcover book. Around her neck, the heavy, tarnished metal necklace, the incredibly cheap but priceless symbol of her late mother's enduring, unbreakable love, rested gently against her heart. The billionaire slowly walked over and wrapped his strong arms securely around his little girl, kissing the top of her head. He silently vowed to spend every single remaining second of his life, and every single penny of his vast fortune, protecting her, nurturing her incredible intellect, and building a world where children like her would never have to freeze on a street corner again. The crushing systemic oppression of the elite had attempted to completely extinguish her light, but the young, fearless underdog had not just survived. She had completely rewritten the rules of the game and emerged victorious, proving that true power does not come from a bank account, but from a fiercely unbroken spirit. But before we close the book on this incredible, heart-stopping story of ultimate karma, I need to turn the camera directly to you, the viewer sitting at home. I want you to look deep inside your own moral compass and answer a terrifyingly difficult question. If you were that deeply traumatized 8-year-old black girl, and you were standing in the shadows watching your vicious, racist, and abusive stepmother raise a cup of lethal poison to her own lips, what would you have done? Would you have stepped out of the shadows, slapped the cup away, and saved the life of a monster just to be the bigger person and maintain your moral high ground? Or would you have done exactly what she did, standing in absolute chilling silence, watching your abuser confidently drink her own death sentence to permanently protect your father and secure your own survival? Does the brutal necessity of self-defense ever justify allowing an evil person to completely destroy themselves in front of your eyes? Where exactly is the line between ultimate justice and cold-blooded revenge? Tell me your absolute, honest truth in the comments down below, because I guarantee you, this debate is going to tear the internet apart.